Without a doubt, it was the hardest hit ball that I'd ever seen in my life. And it happened at one of my dad's summer office picnics, one that he took me to when I was in junior high school. I'd figured that it was going to be pretty much of a boring day. Smile at the adults, try to find somebody my age to play with. The food would be good. It always was at these things. But quite frankly, I had learned from previous picnics like this one, there really wasn't going to be much of anything there that would hold the interest of me, a 12-year-old boy. Nothing, that is, until the adult men decided to play a game of softball. Now, my dad was in his early 50s by then, so he gladly deferred to the young bucks from the office who wanted to demonstrate their athletic prowess to all of the attractive wives and secretaries and sweethearts who were going to be watching this contest from the sidelines. But as the game wore on, there came a point when they needed a pinch hitter to stand in for somebody. And all the young guys on both teams began to yell at my dad, saying it was time for the old man to finally get in the game. Now, truth be told, he put them off again and again. He really didn't want to do this at all, but they were relentless in egging him on. And finally, he gave in. So as he picked up the bat and approached the plate, I prepared myself for all the emotional embarrassment that a kid can have when a parent is about to demonstrate just how feeble and silly and clumsy they can be in their old age. I started to put my head down, kind of in shame, actually, and that's why I almost missed it. Because he swung at the very first pitch, and it was a perfect, fluid, powerful swing. And it totally crushed that ball with an explosion that sounded like a rifle shot going off. The ball was still rising in a perfect line drive when it crossed over the fence deep in center field and disappeared high into the treetops beyond. The outfielders never even bothered to move. They just stood there with their mouths open as this blistered ball screamed about 50 feet over their heads and disappeared into all of that foliage behind them. They looked and they looked, but they never did find that ball. And they had to finish the game with another one. Now, over the next decades, I played a lot of ball for a lot of teams. I even coached off and on for years and scouted players and all that. I watched innumerable games from the ranks of high school up to and including the Detroit Tigers. But I still have never seen a ball hit that hard. Not ever. See, what I didn't know then was that my dad, back in the 1920s, he'd spent a few years playing semi-professional ball for a team from the tough north side of Pittsburgh. And after that towering home run that day at the office picnic, I began to see my dad through completely different eyes. Now, I wanted to share that story with you today because I think that happens to us as we grow up. I think there are those moments when certain incidents allow us, maybe force us, to see our parents in a different light. And those moments, they become something like turning points in our lives, and sometimes also turning points in our relationships with them. Sooner or later, every generation passes its mantle on to the next one. The symbolism of this passing of the mantle goes back to the Old Testament times, when a mantle was probably the most important piece of clothing that a man had. It was this loose-fitting outer garment, could be used as protection against the elements, could be used as bedding or a place to sit, as luggage to roll up and carry other items. Clearly, it had a multifunctional purpose. But a mantle also had tremendous symbolic value to it. It could be given as a pledge, given to pay off a debt. It could be torn into pieces to show grief. And with the Old Testament prophets, the mantle also became that symbol of power and authority. So when the great prophet Elijah took his mantle and put it on the shoulders of his successor, Elisha, it symbolized this passing of one generation to another. So as I was remembering that day at the office picnic and how it affected my life, I was reminded how we always carry with us the mantle that we get from our parents, don't we? Especially that mantle that sons and daughters receive from their fathers. Now, in this morning's scripture reading, we have this rather interesting incident where Jesus has gone back home. He's gone back to his roots. And he's the guest speaker for that morning down at his home church. And the point of identification that people had in that place was the fact that Jesus was Joseph's son. Now, Jesus may have been 30 years old. He may have been gone from Nazareth for a long time. But in their eyes, their primary point of recognition, this mantle that he wore so they could identify him, was still the fact that he was Joseph's son. In so many ways, we're all the products of our parents, aren't we? We all wear their mantles. And every year, Father's Day is probably something of a mixed bag of emotions for a lot of us. If our dads are still alive, then many of us will take this day to show our appreciation and our love for them. And we'll do that in ways that are both large and small. We'll show Dad the affection we feel toward him. But then there are many of us, like me, who have lost their dads over the years, and for us, this day holds a very strong sense of remembrance, doesn't it? Others of us maybe had a pretty rough relationship with our father, and maybe we still grapple with the best way to connect to him, even if we are adults in our own right with our own children. And so this day becomes something of a challenge. Still others of us, maybe we mourn the lack of any real relationship at all with the man who fathered us. And so this day is kind of a sad time for us because we mourn what might have been, what should have been. A couple points here about fathers in general. I honestly do believe that with very, very few exceptions, fathers do the absolute best they can. And the ones who don't do a particularly good job of parenting are probably victims of the parenting that was done to them. And so as they have tried to raise their own children, they follow the only role model they've ever known, even when that role model was very negative and sometimes destructive. But I really don't think that any parent, any father gets up in the morning and thinks to himself, boy, today I'm really going to screw up my kid's life. I just don't believe it happens that way. More often than not, parents, I think, deserve the benefit of the doubt. More often than not, I think dads do the best that they're capable of doing, even when maybe they fail and they fall short, because they're only working with the tools that they inherited. They're only laboring under the weight of the mantle that they carry. As I've gotten older, I've come to realize just how blessed I was to be born to the parents I had. And both of them were responsible in large measure for the person that I have become in life. But, of course, it was my dad who was responsible for the man that I have become in life. I never once heard a word of prejudice or bigotry come out of his mouth toward anybody who was of a different color, a different creed, or a different faith. I never once heard him express a word of resentment or anger toward those who had more than we did in material things. We attended church as a family, and it was at his side in the pew where, as a very young child, I first heard him singing harmony to some of the hymns, and I remember thinking to myself at the time, whoa, that's cool. He could build everything from violins to telescopes with his hands. He could paint landscapes on canvas. He could fix cars. He could do ceramics. And he was a whiz at math. In many ways, he was among the last of what I call the generalists. He was married to my mom for 57 years when he died. He spent 47 years working for the same insurance company. He started as a high school dropout, a gopher in the mailroom, and he ended up as the trusted associate agency manager. My father taught me that it was important to stand up for what's right. And if I was the only one standing up, to never be afraid. And yeah, he came from that old north side of Pittsburgh, a place where homes and cars and properties were bought and sold on nothing more than a handshake. A place where a man's word was literally the most important thing in his life. So he was raised with this strong sense of ethics and honesty. Now, my purpose today in sharing some of these personal glimpses into the relationship that I was blessed to have with my dad, I want to grab the attention of every man who's watching this today. And it doesn't matter if you don't happen to be a father. What matters is that every one of you, as males in our society in the year 2020, every one of you has some profound opportunities to impact the people in your lives, the young people in your lives, and you can do that as men. Every one of you has some enormous responsibilities to influence the younger ones around you. Maybe you do that as a brother or an uncle or a grandparent or a cousin or a nephew, a neighbor, a teacher, a coach, a friend. Whether it's in the workplace or the classroom, the neighborhood, the gym, the library, or out on the golf course. You have those opportunities. And sometimes, they're huge things like faith and justice, personal integrity, and social concerns. And you can often express these things surprisingly in simple and small ways, just by a word of your kindness, or an act of your compassion, a donation of your time, a sharing of your knowledge. Never forget that the kids around you, they're really observant, and they're watching you all the time to see what you do and how you act, to figure out what's important to you and why it's important, to figure out what it means to be a man, to figure out how they're to respect other men and respect other women. So if you want the boys around you who are young to grow up with a stronger sense of life's purposes than just to be the neighborhood champion at some Xbox video game, then give them a role model by your living that will actually do something to enhance their future. Do something that will actually deepen them as people. Do something that will show them the faith that real men have. And if you do really want the younger girls around you to grow up aspiring to be more than the next reincarnation of a Kardashian in the year 2030, then for heaven's sakes, give them encouragement and direction by your living so they can see what true maturity looks like. They can learn how women are supposed to be treated so they can see that when it comes to their own futures, the sky really is the limit. So, we have all received a mantle from our fathers. And we've all taken that mantle, and as we have worn it, we've changed it. We've shaped it according to our life experiences and our values. And at some point in our lives, we pass that mantle on. Having worn it, altered it, hopefully improved it, we pass it on to those who are coming up behind us, the new generation. The next generation. Stop to think about it. It's an awesome responsibility. But I think we can do it. Because after all, our fathers did. Amen.